Welcome to the Why Did I Get Cancer podcast. I'm Deborah Herlax-Enos, a small-town girl turned TV nutritionist and healthy living expert. I design health programs for the average guy or gal, including big takeaway is read your labels, eat as much organic as you can possibly get, and also know which items you don't have to purchase organic so that your food budget that I'm so suspicious that this might be one of my contributors to breast cancer. And today's conversation is with Kelly Ryerson, also known as the Glyphosate Girl. And for a lot of you, you either probably know a lot about glyphosate or this might be the first time you're hearing this word. So Kelly, welcome to Why Did I Get Cancer? And first of all, what is glyphosate and why are you so darn interested in it?
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I am so pleased that people are starting to learn what this is because it's extremely important both to our health and to our environment. And it's something that's been around a long time. Glyphosate is the active ingredient in the weed killer Roundup. And it is the most used herbicide and actually pesticide, with herbicides being a category underneath it, in the world. And it has long been marketed as something that's completely non-toxic and there is no problem to human health or animal health or soil health or anything. And I certainly disagree. And fortunately, more and more evidence is coming out about this chemical that we really need to be having our eyes on it. A little history on glyphosate. So glyphosate was discovered in 1960 and it was being developed for potential use as a pharmaceutical. And they weren't able to find any pharmaceutical uses for it. And so they did notice, however, that it could be used effectively as a pipe cleaner or a metal boil cleaner because it was able to bind to minerals and make it easier to clean.
Oh boy.
So it was used very successfully in industry for cleaning. And along the way, they noticed that it had this great ability to also kill weeds, and it was a really effective herbicide. So Monsanto actually bought it, and Monsanto, the very notorious chemical agriculture company, bought it and turned it into what we now know as Roundup. And so they took glyphosate and they added a surfactant to it and some water, and and the surfactant is like a soapy substance that allows it to penetrate into leaves. And they took it, it's called POEA, is the one we use in the United States, which actually is a type of surfactant that they banned in Europe. And so the European formulation is actually considerably less toxic than the one we use in the United States. So they're bothering to make two different ones. We get the bad one. And so it hit the market, and it was really popular for use in landscapes and in agriculture. Then, along the way in the 90s, the Monsanto was like, well, we can actually, they were losing patent on glyphosate. So they needed to figure out a new way to keep on making money off of this blockbuster pesticide. And they were well along the way to developing genetically modified seeds. Now, this is something that's really interesting to me because most of my life, GMOs have been around. I have always thought that people that criticize GMOs were anti-technology, because I don't know if it's because I'm from Silicon Valley, but I thought that that was a little bit overreactive to think that GMOs would necessarily be poor for health. However, turned out when they were developing it, the key idea was to make it tolerant to the use of Roundup. So you could spray as much Roundup as you wanted on these seeds and on these crops, and they would still live.
Oh my gosh. And these are called Roundup Ready. Is that what I've heard?
That's right. So they're called Roundup Ready. There's Roundup Ready soy, Roundup Ready corn, Roundup Ready cotton, Roundup Ready alfalfa, Roundup Ready sugar beets. And now when you're driving across the country, if you ever do a cross country trip and you drive through our breadbasket in our heartland, it is absolutely astounding. I really wish more people that lived on the coast would drive through there, because it is just on all the highways, left and right, that is all it is. It's just these GMO crops. And it's appalling and shocking. And when you're driving with me, you'd be really annoyed because I can't stop being aghast for miles and miles. I was recently driving through Indiana with my son, and he was like, oh my gosh, I get it. I'm like, look,
Mom, stop.
Everywhere. There are those signs that are Roundup Ready, but a lot of times it's just an assumption. I think it's 90% now of the corn that's grown in our country is GMO. A side note on that's really interesting is that Mexico recently banned, they decided they were no longer going to import American GMO corn, particularly because they want to ban glyphosate because they know of its carcinogenic potential.
Really?
So they said they're going to do that. And it's a big war right now because the United States said, absolutely not. There's no evidence that this causes human harm. And they're like, actually, there's substantial evidence, but our State Department is putting huge pressure on Mexico to continue importing it because it's a big market for us. Meanwhile, there are actually a lot of farmers in the United States that are thinking this is a great opportunity to be able to change off of the GMO pattern and go and grow non-GMO corns and return to some native varieties. But the United States is holding strong to protect industry. So it's really quite something.
So it sounds like our government maybe doesn't have our health in mind.
I mean, absolutely not. In fact, the residue levels that they allow on of glyphosate and of Roundup on American crops in general is so much higher than what they allow in Europe. It is really disgusting. And the way that they set these levels of safety are specifically what the industry groups request, like how much are they going to need to spray this year? And they tell the EPA, and the EPA will adjust those maximum residue levels according to what the industry asks for. So there's actually no science behind what those levels are. Very frustrating.
So we're basically poisoning people.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly what's happening. There is poison being sprayed
and varying amounts. Like, I mean, some years it might be a lot, and maybe some years it's a moderate amount. And how much is safe?
And I would argue that it's like 1 part per billion. It's a tiny, minuscule amount in the diet that is possibly okay. And damage has been shown to the microbiome at tiny levels. That it's definitely contaminated our water. It's in the air. It's burned with ethanol. Actually, is made from GMO corn, and GMO corn has a lot of glyphosate in it. So when the ethanol hits the gas tank and then it's burned, it can get into the air that way. And so there really is no avoiding this. Down to the fact that it is in cotton, it's in tampons, and so that's really easy to be picking it up through these different sanitary products. And
Right, or cotton sheets. Did I hear you say something earlier, about there's 2 different types of Roundup? Basically, Europe requires a Roundup with fewer chemicals?
yes, so this is so distressing and angering. And I wish, and I've actually complained to the government many times about this. I don't understand why we can't, if they are capable of making an effective product that's less toxic, why? And it's obviously cheaper to make. So the United States doesn't seem to have any care when it comes to pesticides, it appears to me. And yeah, and so this really really toxic surfactant that I think actually has a lot to do with how toxic it is on our microbiome and causing inflammation. We
Mhm.
get that one, and Europe said they actually won't use POEA, the surfactant, in anything. So they banned it a long time ago, knowing just how toxic it is. So we're spraying this one, and this combination of glyphosate plus this POEA. And then this is the real kicker. There was a French scientist, Dr. Serolini. He did a study to see what actually is in the formulated product. Like, he bought the bottle of Roundup. He's like, what exactly is in it? And he actually
Mhm.
found a bunch of arsenic and heavy metals also within this formulated product.
Oh my gosh.
So now we have heavy metals, we have POEA, and we have glyphosate. And this is the most used pesticide we have in this country and around the world, but the particularly toxic kind here.
Right, no wonder why we are ill, and I'm sure that, you know, you've got plenty of studies that you can cite of maybe people who are in closer contact with Roundup. So farmers, I come from a farm family, and I remember when my dad started using Roundup. It was the 70s, and we were told it's going to increase your yields. And farming is not easy. So if you can increase your yields and not hurt anybody and it's not toxic, you're going to try it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And and I have so much compassion now, and I meet with farmers that use it regularly. And it's really sad because they're in a financial bind to be using these chemicals. And a lot of the subsidies that, really almost all of the subsidies that our country gives in each farm bill, goes only to this chemical farming model. Like, if you're a farmer and you want to do organic farming, or you want to use low levels of chemical, you don't want to do GMO, you can't get subsidies, or the subsidies are extremely small. So
Wow. Okay.
they also will only provide the subsidies to a certain level of a certain quantity of farms. So you have to have a big farm of GMOs and chemical spraying in order to get the subsidies from the government.
Okay.
So there's no incentive.
So I'm just letting this sink in. So you get government money if you comply with the chemical model, which studies have shown is hurting the farmer, all the animals on the farm, the people who are consuming, and the farm workers. That's what you're saying.
That's right. And the government makes sure that that keeps on happening. This is entirely, they could completely change the model if they decided they were going to support real farming and abandon this chemical farming model. And, or at least, give equal
Right.
playing time. Fortunately, there are a lot of activists that are in there that right now, with regenerative farming, trying to get at least more access to loans, because that's another big economic piece of why we still have this GMO stuff. But when you have Bayer, which bought Monsanto, and these other enormous corporations going in there and saying, listen, this is what we want. This is the money we're putting into it. This is the decision you're going to make. And by the way, EPA regulator, we have a fancy spot for you here on our executive board as soon as you leave the EPA. If you make this happen for us, it just repeatedly happens. And I went with the group Moms Across America, organized a panel at the EPA, and we brought doctors. I don't know if any of you know Dr. Zach Bush. He was there. We had toxicologists. We had another scientist, and we went to the EPA and we presented 2 times to the board of pesticides. All the evaluators were there. And we said, this is the problem with glyphosate. And we listed all of these effects. And they said, what you're telling us is just anecdotal. There is nothing in here that's actually scientifically factual. And we said, but we have this huge stack of independent peer-reviewed research that shows that this is what's happening. It's not like we're just saying, oh, chemicals are bad. This is actually what's happening. And they said, well, if you want anything to actually change with the way that we look at it, you're going to need to change everything that's going on over in the Hill. Like, so that was really shocking. I started digging even further into it. And I'm like, so who ultimately is making this decision? Like, who's the person that's saying, is it Biden/Trump? Who is it? And I uncovered this agency that is actually within the executive branch, that's called OIRA. And it is a group of economists that sit there. And anytime any important regulation is going to be made by any of our regulators, like whether it be the USDA, FDA, or EPA, that regulation will go in and they will do a cost benefit analysis and absolutely not weigh in the cost of massive human health and disease. And they don't correlate it. And so they're like, well, this would be a huge economic cost to the farmer. And so therefore we won't, move forward on halting the spray. So I feel like the end is right there between the corporations and the economists.
It's frustrating and anger producing and just head shaking because of the lack of common sense. And so you can't weigh human costs. They won't look at studies that say, look, there are areas in our country called Cancer Alley and, Mississippi River. I've heard Dr. Mark Hyman talk about that many times, that people, toward the end of that river, farm communities, cancer is off the charts. Absolutely off the charts. Yeah.
Oh, it's so sad down there. In the entire dead zone that's down there in the Gulf of Mexico, where all the chemicals, it's just a toxic soup.
So it's called a dead zone?
Yeah.
Really? I didn't know about that. So there's an area where like this, just all the chemicals just
no aquatic life can possibly live.
Great.
Or human life for that matter. The cancer numbers are horrendous, as you said.
And the people who are getting sick, I'll just say it, are usually poor people.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So
almost always.
Always. Yeah. Because again, I understand the farm community. And, I think most small farms make less than $50,000 a year for small farms.
Oh, yeah. Many are actually under the poverty line.
Right.
They're just trying to make
trying to make it. And so who's getting sick? Yeah. People who lower socioeconomic.
Completely. And it's so unfair. And, Monsanto had a long, dark history of going ahead and dumping all of their toxic experiments into the backyards of these communities. And it's sickening. And they really have never been held to task for that. Like lawsuits haven't gone through. It just is so upsetting to see what can happen to these communities when, they're poor communities. And of course, the same is true with the farming communities in terms of the Mexican farm workers that we have in California, actually now across the country. And it's a horrendous situation there where they're out there spraying and oftentimes they return back to Mexico just to die when they had the cancer. And so what is that? They do have some lawyers that are advocating for them, but without the policy changes, it's really going to not make any difference.
Right. And it's going to be a long, expensive battle. And the people who are fighting it now aren't going to be here to see the result.
No.
Because they're sick.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're very, very sick. And what's so hard about it is like that when we say sick, it's not just cancer, it's so many different conditions.
So many different things. And it changes DNA.
Yeah.
So you're passing it down from generation to generation. So the legacy you're leaving your children and grandchildren is illness, chronic inflammation, all these things that we know about, but can't seem to get across the finish line for real change.
And I sit back and I often wonder, all of us are touched in some way by illness, whether it's a family member, ourselves, or a child, or what is it. And I don't understand how those personal experiences haven't been enough for people in power to want to make that change. Even the people that say work at Bayer, what about them? They must be touched by cancer in some way. Who isn't? So it really baffles me.
Are you all into beef tallow? I am new to the beef tallow game, and I have to tell you, I've resisted it for 3 years. I first heard about beef tallow on my friend Holistic Hilda's podcast from the Weston A. Price. And I thought, beef tallow, my image was my skin is going to smell like a cheeseburger. So I just didn't really put any time into it. But again, I'm 60 now, as most of you know. My skin is continuing to get drier and drier. So I thought, why not? My cuticles are a mess. I've got dry spots on my body. let's throw whatever we can that's natural at it. So I've gone to farmers markets, I've gone online, I've done my research. Let me show you my brand that I am in love with right now, which is called Toops & Co. Organic. This is their frankincense skin balm. It is beef tallow. It's organic essential oils, frankincense. First of all, let's talk about frankincense. Frankincense is a wonderful essential oil that is widely known to be anti-inflammatory. Then you combine that with this grass-fed beef tallow, which is full of vitamins and full of great essential fatty acids. And next thing you know, my skin is glowing. I feel like there's less redness now. I use this at night. And I got to tell you, the first couple of nights, I thought, okay, is there anything to this? And I woke up the next day and even my husband said, wow, your skin looks really good. So I count that as a really big victory. There's a few products that I'm loving at Toops & Co. I've already mentioned this frankincense skin balm. It's in 2 ounces. It's in glass, which I love. Their products are in glass, so no microplastics. And it's the perfect travel size. So that is really good. I'm also really loving this blue tansy body oil. And it doesn't take very much. Their suggestion is you get out of the shower, your skin's still a little bit damp, do a couple of squirts all over, and honestly, amazing things will happen, and it smells amazing. And then I told you guys, when I go all in, I go all in. They also have a line of cosmetics. So I'll tag these products, and I'm using this lip gloss. It's the perfect color for probably a lot of people. It is too small. Berry Marvelous is the name. I thought it would be too small to read, but I've got my glasses on. Berry Marvelous, their lip gloss. I'm using their mascara, and I actually even got eyeshadow, and I hardly ever use eyeshadow. But I was looking for all natural cosmetics. So right now I am telling you, big thumbs up. Go to their website. So it's Toops, T-O-U-P-S, toopsandco.com /Deborah Enos, and you're going to get 15% off your purchase. I'm going to tag all of this information in the show notes, and I am telling you, I think you're going to love it. I am a new fan, but I'm a very vocal and very happy fan. So hope you enjoy. Now I want to move on to, I'm a glass half full kind of gal, but this conversation just makes me really sad. So what can the average person do for a couple of things? One, how do you protect yourself and protect your family? And then the second part of that conversation is, how do we participate in creating change in this area in our country?
Mm-hmm. Well, so the only way that I can continue going on all this, focusing on glyphosate and this area, is because I do have hope. I think that the problem right now is that most people don't know about it. And the reason why they don't know about it is because there's so many front groups that are out there that are paid for not only by the corporations, but by the government themselves. And there's a whole campaign, Feed the Mind, that the FDA put out. It's literally called that. And it's like a website, and it's an educational platform, so people can better understand how amazing GMOs are and the associated chemicals. So their argument is, the problem is people just don't understand it. If we explain to them how safe it is, they'll all embrace it. So we have that. We have a front group that funds something called GMO Answers. And GMO Answers is literally funded by PR groups that Bayer hired. And that they hired a bunch of academics to come on, people with PhDs, and they're paid to give answers about how safe all these chemicals are to be eating. And so there's so many of these groups, and you have articles in Forbes and all over the place that you start realizing are just fake paid reports. And some of the academic studies as well that the EPA bases their evaluation on are paid for and ghostwritten by Monsanto themselves. And so what I think is the hugest hurdle is, no one wants to be poisoned by this at all. But without the information front and center, without more people like you talking about it, it's just really almost impossible to get the information out. And even in, I founded this website, Glyphosate Facts, to try and be that educational platform that people could find that I was looking for. And even then, the search algorithms on Google aren't going to necessarily bring me anywhere near the top. And because there's just so much money going into
Huh.
these other front ones, and so it's a competing thing there. I have had my blog broken into by them to make sure that this stuff doesn't get out there. I mean, it is just so hard. So my hope is that just in the last 6 months, even, so this is really recent, more people have asked what the heck is glyphosate and what are we actually eating. And I think this is in accordance, in correlation with people just having so many conditions, cancer, autoimmune conditions, just so many. Their kids are sick. My own kids had issues, like bad issues, really bad ocular migraines and digestive issues and ADHD. And I was able to reverse them by becoming conscious of what I was feeding them. But I do feel hopeful. I think that between documentaries, there's one coming out that I was involved in called Common Ground, and that should be available. It's actually coming to theaters this fall, and then it'll be on Netflix later. So that's very exciting.
Okay. Yeah. Very exciting.
And then once you have the information, you can do your best to avoid it. Now, we can't entirely
Mhm.
avoid glyphosate, but you can certainly massively decrease your exposure to glyphosate. And then that's one less thing you need to worry about. And
That's encouraging. How do we do that?
yes. So what we do is so organic food is first and foremost the best decision you can make for yourself. And I know you've been a proponent of that for a really long time. And it is so important, not just with glyphosate, but with a number of different endocrine disrupting chemicals that are on there that can potentiate the effects, the estrogenic effects, and lead to breast cancer. So choosing organic is great. Unfortunately, some organic food will have glyphosate residues because in organic farming, instead of using synthetic fertilizers, they use manure from animals as the fertilizer. But the animals have eaten the GMO corn or soy, and then they have glyphosate in it. And then in the manure is the
Wow.
glyphosate.
Okay.
So,
So it's hard. It's hard.
so that's actually a little point of policy that I think that they need to address. The manure should only be from organically fed
Right.
animals.
Okay, that is yeah, I was wondering because it's insidious, it seems to be everywhere. So how do you
Yeah.
keep organic actually organic?
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, it's so hard. And there's another group that I really like following called the Real Organic
Hmm.
Project, and they talk about these things, and they've been in the organic game forever before people were really even
Okay.
talking about it. Um, and and so that is definitely a thing. Now, I very very much love to go to my farmers
Mhm.
market and ask my farmer exactly what they use and what their practices are. And what I'm noticing is that once again over the last few years, they're more ready to
Yes.
answer because I think more people are
Yes.
asking. So
It is
that's exciting.
exciting.
And
They
they're
are. This
proud.
happened to me last week. I went to our little local Sammamish farmers market last Wednesday night, and I I pretty much only buy fruits and vegetables at my farmer's market. And I asked this woman, I said, "Tell me about your broccoli here," because I'm desperate to get broccoli into my house. She was the only vendor selling it, and I said, "So is this non-sprayed? Is it organic?" She's like, "Oh, let me tell you everything. We Between each broccoli row, we have rows of marigolds because the scent of marigolds will, keep pests away. It's called integrated pest management." And then she told me about how they make this homemade spray with vinegar. And I said, "I'm going to come back every week and buy your broccoli. This was incredible." So they love to talk about it. And it's,
Yeah, it's really a pride
yeah. And I just really want to support them.
because
It's a
as
pride
you know,
point.
and
You're
you would
right.
know from being on a farm, it's hard. It's really hard to get that kind of yield when you're not using the tools that other people are. So it's really admirable, I think, to go into that. So I like to do that, and I like to buy it there. Obviously always am talking to my landscaper who comes around and they're mow and blow, and I talk to them about not using Roundup, and I have a keen eye on them, and it's annoying, but it's just the way it is. and
Hmm.
and I actually was
I agree.
horrified because when I was pregnant with my daughter, I was having some landscaping done and I was having some grass pulled out. And I looked out while I was pregnant, he had sprayed the entire grass with Roundup and killed it all. And it was totally all over the air. And now that was before I
Oh,
even knew just
gosh.
how bad it is. Now, anytime I read a study of like pregnant people that are exposed to Roundup, it makes me so sick to my stomach. Oh my gosh. So,
Oh,
fortunately, she
gosh.
was born healthy, but that is not the case for all.
Great. Well, and I have heard that cancer rates are much higher on if you live on a
Oh,
golf course.
yes, I know. And that is terrifying too. And that should
Yeah.
be a really easy thing to change as well. But I guess like the demands for an extremely pristine golf course are really
Yes, but there are ways to keep a really nice looking yard using all non-chemicals. I mean, my husband, he used to use a lot of Roundup. I will say that, but now he will take a blowtorch and he'll go outside and that's how he kills weeds most of the time. And we also do different things with, vinegars and I would say it
Oh,
really
that's really
works.
grand with the blowtorch. That's really impressive. Yeah,
Isn't
that's
that
really
cool?
cool.
He's a former military guy, so I think he gets to kind of do his army
Oh,
guy
yeah, you'll
kind
be
of
all
thing,
macho
and
out there.
totally macho. Yeah, he's pretty cute.
That's cool.
So Kelly, you mentioned some foods that are very high in glyphosate. So I think you said cotton, beets, corn.
Well, so those things are so most of the GMO soy and corn, and so GMO soy and corn typically most of it goes to animal feed. So the amount that humans are actually eating directly is something like 10% of all GMO corn goes, or maybe even a little less, goes to human consumption, and that comes in the form of high fructose corn syrup and other processed ingredients. And same is true over on the soybean side. So we actually don't eat much in the way of that. Where we are really highly exposed is in what a process called pre-harvest desiccation. And what that is with grains and sugar, which is a variety of legumes, a bunch of different crops. Before harvest, they will spray Roundup like just before harvest to try and dry everything evenly and make for a much easier harvest, like a one pass through harvesting. And unfortunately, because glyphosate is a systemic herbicide, it does go up into whatever that seed, or up into whatever it is. So when the wheat is harvested, it will have a high level of glyphosate in it if that's what they've used. Same is true on oats. A lot of these grains are sprayed, and it's really unfortunate. And there has been some pressure to decrease the glyphosate spray, but they're just replacing other chemicals in its place, and some are more toxic than glyphosate. So it's really hard. It just needs to be a full halt on pre-harvest spraying and a return to just doing swathing like they used to, which is just cutting it and letting it dry, even though like the crop then is put at greater risk if there's rain, it can mold or sprout. But the alternative is we're all being exposed to these toxicities all the time. It goes straight to the mill and then straight into our food. So if you do a glyphosate test on a bunch of different bread products or hummus, you'll see really high levels of glyphosate that are of concern to human health. And you'll also find high levels in orange juice, oftentimes, that non-organic orange juice, and almonds, because they spray around the base of the tree and then it's picked up by the roots and brought up into the fruit ultimately. Same is true, of course, with vineyards in wine. It's high levels of glyphosate in wine and other herbicides and pesticides as well. And that same scientist who did the study on the heavy metals in Roundup also was involved in a study where he had some sommeliers taste wine in France, and they could get it down to being like they know what was used, what sprays were used in the
My
production of the
gosh.
grapes. So whatever that oaky taste was actually might have just been, a chemical taste.
Oh my gosh. So it is truly, I mean, I hadn't even thought about chemicals in wine. Or even orange juice, because of course we look at orange juice like, okay, let's start our day right with a big glass of orange juice, which as a nutritionist, I've never actually, to be honest, never actually said that to anybody. Uh, but wine, yes, I'm a consumer. And now this makes me really think about, is that a source of
Yeah.
me getting, yeah,
And in
wow.
fact, today I was at Whole Foods. I'm having some friends over later, and I wanted to get 2 bottles of white organic wine, and it was hard
Mhm.
to find. And I'm surprised because I know that there are a lot of people putting pressure to find some organic wines, but I had to go over and
Right.
find 2 Italian organic wines. And so I know that part of the problem here in Napa Valley, anyway, is that just the contamination is so much in just the haze that hangs over the Napa Valley of
Hmm.
pesticides. And so, in
Hmm.
order to not have that residue, you really have to go far away from the Napa Valley, which is what some people are doing. They're going farther up on the coast of California to try and get at least soil that hasn't been contaminated and then work
Mm-hmm.
around that. But
Right.
my hope would be that we should be more snobby about our American wine. We should not allow
Yeah.
that. That's like a sacred
Right.
thing.
It really is. And it's a shame that, you had to search so hard to find an organic wine and you basically had to buy something that wasn't produced here. So, is this whole, you know, um, glyphosate chemical use backfiring now because our government still continues to use it, but yet it's being banned in other countries? It sounds like maybe it is.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And in fact, on the grain front, Canada is having a big problem with it too. They use glyphosate like we do. And
Mm,
exporters, the countries that they export to are really putting some strict limits. So they're really having to
really?
back down. Otherwise, they know their export markets are going to be shut to them. So
Huh.
thank goodness for other countries.
Right. Because it sounds like they're really,
They
leading
care
the
more.
charge. Yeah, sounds like they do. So, question: how do you know you've been exposed to glyphosate, and is there testing available?
Yeah. So I finally did test my urine. Urine is the typical way you can get tested, your urine or
Okay,
your hair. And there are labs that will do it. A lab I particularly like is called HRI Labs, and I've sent them many different
okay,
samples, including my daughter's baby tooth and 3 semen samples from some guys to see if glyphosate was in it, and it was in all
hmm.
three. Um,
Wow.
and showing that glyphosate crosses the blood testes barrier, and it's been shown in when they've done studies in the lab that if you apply glyphosate to the semen, that it will kill the sperm. And so when each
Hmm.
time I'm seeing these reports on crashing fertility rates, I'm like, well, I mean, no kidding. And it also affects the ovary. So, I mean, it's just this chemical needs to go. But anyway, anyone can test. It would be really shocking not to have any
I would think, yeah.
glyphosate in your urine. I mean, that would be really miraculous. But one thing that I think
Hmm.
is pretty cool and is something that I did is I tested from the beginning. I changed my lifestyle, made some changes. I put a water filter on my home
Hmm.
because typically water companies don't even test for glyphosate because it's not
Oh,
considered harmful.
okay. Well, isn't that good news, Kelly? Oh
Yeah,
my gosh.
so water filter is a good idea.
Okay, so water
Typically, a
filters.
carbon
Okay,
filter will do a lot in terms of stopping glyphosate. So that's good.
okay,
It's a pretty
great.
basic thing.
Hmm.
And so I do that, but you can monitor and then test afterwards and see how much your levels have come down. And I know
Hmm.
someone that did a sequence of them, and then like didn't eat anything with glyphosate for a week. It came crashing down. Ate one slice of pizza. It went back to its peak, and because right there you have once again the wheat component that had been sprayed. So you can really
Okay.
evaluate, but it's nice because you do have control. This is something you have control over for sure
Hmm.
to a certain extent. You can really minimize your exposure to it with just making the smart decisions.
Okay. And it sounds like those smart decisions, having a water filter in your home, of course, trying to, if you have a yard, using alternative pest management instead of, big thing, a Roundup. But then it sounds like maybe avoiding some foods such as high fructose corn syrup and wheat
Yes, absolutely.
products. Okay.
Yeah. Well, and if you're going to have a wheat product and you aren't gluten intolerant like I am, then just make sure you're having organic. Organic grains will not be sprayed like that.
Okay. And so organic grains are not sprayed at all during the process and at the harvest, because that's when you said
Right.
typically, yeah, go in and spray again. Okay.
Exactly. So the soil won't have it. They don't spray it before planting,
Okay.
and they won't spray it, period, which is great.
Okay.
The only exposure you're going to have is that manure point that I made earlier, but that's small in comparison to what
I
it
would
would be if it
think.
was sprayed outright.
Yeah. Okay. So,
And the other thing to keep in mind too is that, remember, if we go back to it was originally developed as a binder for minerals. So originally it was a mineral binder. It does the same thing in soil. So our crops are often really lacking the nutrients that we need, which is why, I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm supplementing magnesium and zinc and all of these things that should be in our food, but are no longer there.
I hadn't even considered that. So it changes the mineral content of the soil.
It changes the mineral content in terms of what is bioavailable to the crop itself.
Hmm.
So the glyphosate will be in the soil and it'll bind to those minerals, and then they can't, manganese, none of it can make it up into the crop. And so I look around, I see all this anxiety and depression. I mean, there are a lot of causes of that,
Right.
but I'm like, if you could just give everyone magnesium and zinc supplements just to start, I mean, what a difference that would make.
Hmm.
None of us have it for
Right.
food.
Right. Yeah. And low magnesium, impacts sleep, eye twitching, anxiety, muscle recovery. I mean, the list goes on as to why we need minerals, especially magnesium.
Yeah. And so it's so funny to me because I had a doctor when I was in my terrible illness and I realized I was deficient in all of these things. And she was Stanford and Harvard trained. And she said, none of that really matters. That's just sort of a thing. People just like to sell vitamins. None of those levels really matter. And of course, like, as someone that studied biology I didn't, but she did. Not
Right.
to think those are the fundamental parts of how our body operates
Right.
is just really remarkable to me.
Wow.
So no
Wow.
longer my doctor.
Yeah, that sounds like a really, really good shift you made. So it sounds like we just really need to pay attention because we're getting hit with glyphosate and glyphosate misinformation
Yes.
all the time, because you said there's these front groups that will, maybe they're hired by Monsanto and they're talking about how great, these chemicals are. So we really have to protect not only just our bodies, but also what we're reading and make sure we do our own due diligence versus just
Exactly.
listening to what these groups have to say.
And what they will often say, and what you'll see all over the place, is they'll say all of the regulators have said that causes no harm to human health. They will repeat this all the time. And if you look up EPA glyphosate, it'll say EPA found no cause for concern for human health. And they repeat this over and over. And no one would even think to question until like they really had reasons they were sick. Okay, well, what's behind that? I mean, it's a very deep and dark story that they keep on saying this, and it's just so unethical. And sadly, it looked like Europe was going to not be renewing their registration, and recently they just did a total 180, and they said, "Oh yeah, we don't see any cause for concern," and it's just so disappointing. So we'll see what happens there.
So disappointing. It's going to take some work, and if we're thinking about just what is one thing I can do today to protect myself and my family, I don't ever want to get cancer again. Where would you suggest we start?
I think the number one thing to me would be see what is being sprayed around you. If you go to a park, if you go to a dog park, that's another thing. If you have an animal, think about their paws, because Roundup can go right up through their paws. And now there's an explosion in lymphoma in animals, similar to humans with the exposure. And so just see what directly is being sprayed around you. Because as you said, that kind of exposure is usually the most when you're really like the farmers are having. Then go to the grocery store, or go through your kitchen and see what you have that is highly processed and non-organic. And because you might be saying, well, I have all these really healthy foods. I have all this lettuce. I have these veggies and fruits. If they're not organic, they're likely loaded with glyphosate and other chemicals. So that's a huge thing you can do. And organic can be expensive, but it doesn't have to be. And I've been really impressed with what Costco's doing. They have a lot of organic food, and I'll go there and load up each week on all those basics. And so you don't have to spend a whole lot. And but it does require us all getting back into the kitchen, which sucks. I mean, I hate that. I don't like to cook.
It does suck. I know. And you're tired at the end of the day.
You're so tired.
Right.
I used to love lean cuisines. I mean, I just did. I spent most of my 20s doing that every night. That was easy.
Me too.
And so, and I can imagine what microwaving that plastic did to me. But
oh gosh. Yes. Mine was Weight Watcher lasagna. I think I probably ate that for about 7 years.
Yeah, right.
In my 20s.
It was great.
Yeah. So easy.
Lean.
That's right. Because if you eat fat, you're going to get fat. So let's go ahead and do the Weight Watcher way or the lean cuisine. That's a whole other podcast, Kelly.
Oh my gosh, truly. I'm going to tune into when you do that one.
We should have a panel of women that we all fell for the marketing.
Oh, completely. So, and and look and see when I travel, I look and see what organic restaurants there are. But I am realistic that sometimes that's just not a thing. And I try and just not beat myself up about it.
Yeah.
But when I am driving, for example, on this recent cross country drive, I did stop in at Whole Foods. I saw where the Whole Foods were. I'd stop there and I'd get like that organic rotisserie chicken and just some
Hmm.
things and split it up. My son and I would split it up. And so it is a big pain and it's not fun, but I think it's worth it because you're just protecting your long term health for sure.
You really are.
And in your fertility. And there are other studies that have shown that it crosses the blood brain barrier. And that really scares me because then it could be connected with Alzheimer's, which a report came out saying. And so, just all of these small steps that you're
Mm.
making every single day, just as small decisions, really do add up significantly.
Yeah.
And so, that's the good
Yeah.
news. It doesn't have to be scary.
Well, I like your tip too about, just check out your surroundings. I mean, we're just wrapping up summer here in Seattle, and so people maybe are not, going to be outside quite as much. But I do when I see, I'm driving down the street and I see our city and they're, the men and women are out there and they've got the big spray trucks. I roll up my windows, I turn on my recycle air, and I I just hold my breath as I'm driving through the chemical zone. But I'm just trying to be more aware of, even when my neighbors are spraying and maybe I'm outside my garden, I'll just go back into my house and close up the windows, turn on my air purifier and go out again later. But you're right. It's a pain in the butt
It's really
to
a
have to,
pain.
yeah, it just adds so much extra time to your day, but you got to look out for yourself and your family.
You just do. Because I don't think at the end of the day, when you're at the end of your life, you'll regret it. Because you certainly would be adding years by just taking these small steps.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Well, Kelly, Glyphosate Girl, you have opened my eyes. I first heard about glyphosate at my National Nutrition Conference about 5 years ago, and I thought, what is glyphosate? and I, so I've known about it for a few years, but now I feel like you've really given me a targeted approach
Oh, great.
to really make some changes. And I'm actually going to try to figure out how I can get that urine test because I am super curious now about my glyphosate levels.
Yeah, because you are cautious about what you eat. So it is interesting to see. And then you can
Yeah,
start the mystery if they're high. Where is it coming from?
that's right. Where is this coming from? And maybe I'm not being as careful as I thought, or I just need to take a deeper dive into things I'm buying for my family.
Yeah.
So Kelly, thank you so forever reading labels. So I've done that for you. Hope you enjoy.